Hey, Karan, your spirit fingers ready? We're about to jump into Kirsten Dunst.
Ooh, he has a new movie out, Civil War, which you're going to talk about and also get into her career. This is Karan from LA.
This is Alex from Los Angeles, and welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but are both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we cover a filmmaker, actor, director, or other creative who shaped our love of movies. So join us. We explore why they matter to us before reviewing the three movies in their filmography that made the biggest impact on us. So, as you said, Karan, it's time to Kirsten Dunst it and get into a Civil War. But before we get into the latest Kirsten Dunst film and debate that, just kind of go over, what are your thoughts on Kirsten? What does her filmography mean to you? What does she mean to you as an actress?
I was thinking a lot about this, just rewatching her movies and thinking about our list that we'll get into in a little bit of sort of our top three, is that she kind of has a very unique presence in Hollywood, I think, from, teenage star to obviously a big blockbuster mainstay with the Spider-Man movies and such, but then also this kind of very interesting auteur actress working with really interesting filmmakers. I don't think there is a career arc like this around her, at least not in this generation. She kind of stands singularly. And it's been so interesting to think about how her career could have gone, She could have just been a blockbuster mainstay. She could have just been a romantic sort of teenage movie star and kind of just built on that persona for a while. Instead, she turned into a very complex, interesting actor. So when I think of Kristen Dunst, of course, I think of MJ, but then I think of really layered, complex female characters that she's played. And this might sound maybe insulting in some ways, but it's not. I mean this with love. I think of her as sad girl and now sad woman. That's sort of the first thing I think of because so many of the movies that she's done, there's always like a haunting, lonely quality to the character that she plays, and she's just so good at it because it's never surface level. It's just really lived in and deep, and she's really explored that. As an adult actor, I feel like that's what she's done most of. So yeah, that's what I think of when I think of her. And then the last thing I would say is that I think she makes very good choices. Like I know that if I'm going to go and watch a Kristen Dunst movie, there'll be some intention and meaning behind them. Like she doesn't just show up and do whatever. She doesn't. Everybody has bombs in their career, but I think she has more interesting things in her career. So there's that. That's something that I expect from her.
Interesting. Yes. So for me, it's similar in that I hadn't really thought too much about her entire career until we
Uh-huh.
started diving into this episode and found it a lot more interesting as I thought more about it than initially I had would have assumed. We'll get into when we get into like our first introductions to Kirsten, huge fan of hers from the beginning of like a teen comedy star. Thought she had a very unique personality where it was very energetic and spunky, but there was some, I don't want to say necessarily darkness, but there was a another side, that a depth to that personality that she would play in all these early movies, including like Spider-Man, that I thought made her character seem really real and relatable. She wasn't just a cookie cutter, oh, like happy, spunky, funny, blonde teen star. She was that, but there was something else there that I think
Yep.
made her really unique back in her teen comedy days, which is what I love about Kirsten, and that's the person that I like. And then it's interesting to see her kind of flip that sort of bubblier side, and then it pulls up the sad girl persona that you're talking about. Definitely seems to be how she decided to transition into being an adult actress, which is really difficult for any young actor, especially females,
Mm-hmm.
just figure out what's their lane. How do they? Because you can't be the spunky cheerleader when you're in your 30s and 40s and 50s. What do you do? And I think she did a lot of interesting choices in her career. Though again, I definitely prefer her older films and her older personality. But it's just interesting seeing her in these newer roles, and especially Civil War too, which we'll get into, of how when she does downplay things more, to me at least, it's more affecting because I know that she has that other side to her that isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what happened? Like, why isn't she the Kirsten Dunst from Bring It On and Spider-Man in terms of the persona? And it just gives more weight to these performances where she doesn't have any levity, right? She has
Mm-hmm.
none of that. And to me, then it's more even affecting when I see a dour Kirsten Dunst because I like the fun Kirsten Dunst and
Right.
she's not there. So what does that mean? And it makes the roles and the performances more interesting to me.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, we'll get into it, but I didn't watch those early movies that, you love and now
Hmm.
I love as well until very recently. So it's sort of been interesting to kind of go back and connect the dots from that Kirsten to who I've come to know her as. I guess the other theme I would call out is just intelligence, that she just seems and comes across on screen, but also just in her interviews like a very intelligent, grounded person. And that shows across the board. Even when she's like a young teenage star, you can see that, yeah, there's something going on behind those eyes. You can see the wheels turning and very intent driven, but also very light on her feet. Because often actors who are very intelligent or come across as intelligent, you can sort of see the intentionality and the work behind the performance, versus she always feels very effortless to me, very light on her feet. So yeah, it's a very interesting career, very interesting performer, singular, I think. Just her
Hmm.
look and her voice and all of it, I think. Which in a way, I was appreciative and applauded that, oh, what a great career she's had. And like you said, it's so hard for like child stars or teenage stars to, transition into being adult actors and have success. And she's obviously done that. But it also made me feel like I wish there were more,
Hmm.
because she's just so incredible. But I guess that's what we'll get into.
Yeah, speaking of career, her latest film. Why don't we jump into this then? I'll do the summary on IMDb, and then love to hear your thoughts on this film. So this is Civil War, just came out this year, so 2024, written and directed by Alex Garland. The IMDb plot summary: a journey across a dystopian future America, following a team of military embedded journalists as they race against time to reach DC before rebel factions descend upon the White House. So other than Kirsten Dunst, it also stars Wagner Moura and Kaylee Spaney. So
And
Civil
her
War.
husband, Jesse
Oh,
Plemons.
uncredited. So I couldn't put that in.
Yes.
He's uncredited in the film, but yes, her husband is also in this movie, which is fun in that scene just to see the two of them in there and be like, this is
Hmm.
interesting. How are they going to play this? But yeah, what are your first Civil War thoughts? How Kirsten did, and yeah, just general thoughts on the film.
I mean, this movie, even before it came out, and now even more so, has become a bit of a hot button conversation topic. And I totally understand like why people are maybe mad at it, but also not getting what they're looking for. And often the criticism that I've seen about the movie is that the movie doesn't take a side, or the characters don't take a side. And I'm okay with that part. In fact, and in listening to Alex Garland, the director, talk about this more, and I sort of do believe in this, that I think we live in a world that's just way too divided. It doesn't have to be. And it's in a way almost sort of more interesting to actually just let it all hang and let the people make their own decisions, like all this debate about why are California and Texas together. Well, I don't think we need to spell it out. You can make your own theories. And I love that aspect of the movie, that it doesn't spell it all out. And at the end of it, I think what the movie does a great job at is that it sort of states that kind of everybody is the same, because you forget who's on which side at some point, even in that Christmas kind of decoration. And this is a spoiler warning, I suppose, if people
Oh,
haven't
right.
seen it,
Yes, we
but
should say
but
that.
there is a scene where, some gunmen wearing sort of army gear are shooting, and for a journalist, which is Kristen Wiig and the team, one of them asked them, who are you shooting? They're like, we don't know. Nobody knows who you're shooting. And that's sort of, I guess, what happens in Civil War. But you can sort of abstract that to our own world, that all these people who are in arms with each other about things that they disagree about, well, actually, if you zoom out, you might find more similarity in it, I guess. So I think that's a pretty strong message that comes across in the movie. I guess the other big theme is just journalism, and
Hmm.
how on one hand it's very heroic and what they do, and these are photojournalists that they're literally in the line of fire, capturing, documenting these photos and such. And that feels important, that feels weighty, it's necessary. Of course, somebody has to do this, and they do that. On the other hand, the fact that they're sort of boosted and reveling in their own ego to the point that they are not even moved by it, and it's all about how can I get the next best photo. I think it's a critique in some ways
Hmm.
as well. So I think it's a very interesting portrayal, and you can be again on any side of it, but that really struck me, is that yeah, you admire all these people, but at the same time you question their intentions, what are they driven by. And especially when you see it's purposeful that the four lead characters in the van who are taking this road trip to DC, they're all at different ages of their lives, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Kaylee Spain is this upcoming person who's really enamored by Kirsten Dunst and sort of finds her way to join this team. And she's hungry, she's out there, and she would do anything. Versus you see Kirsten Dunst's character, who's kind of been there, done that, hardened through all
Mm-hmm.
of this, is sort of at the end of her
Right.
career of like what goes on from here. And then Stephen McKinley Henley's character is like much older. He's seen all of this, but he's still, it's almost like an addiction, like that he didn't have to come on this journey, but
Right.
yet he does, you know? So it's saying a lot about journalism without kind of really beating you all over the head. So all that was amazing. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that the filmmaking, the budget that As Garland got, and the way he put that to use, like it's definitely a movie full of set pieces. It's,
Mm-hmm.
you know, magnificently crafted. We talk a lot about mise en scène on this podcast. So from sound design to very specific music choices, which can rub you the wrong way or the right way, however you want. But it's all very intentional and purposeful. All of that felt like a war movie made now, you know, as we think about great war movies made over time. This is
Mm-hmm.
kind of in that league, if you will. Of course, I need more time and more distance from it, but it definitely, you can feel the filmmaking in a good way. I think where this movie loses me is not so much in what side you're on, because like I said, I don't really care about that. I think to me, it loses me on just a lack of character development. I don't really care about any of these people, and they're not really given a lot to do with. They're making the most of what they're given to do with, which it sort of ends up then being that I don't really care much about what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's the point. Like, we as audiences who are consuming the news are also kind of part of it all, right? Like, you tune out once you've seen this massacre, this school shooting, this terrible thing, you start to just tune out. So maybe that's the point. But at some point, I'm not going to remember much of this movie, I think, as visceral as it was, because it just didn't have that kind of character build up connection, you know, at an emotional level. I missed that. And I think just a little bit more detail into that would have been amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd ask about Kristen. I mean, she's very good in the movie, but she doesn't have much to do, honestly. And she's doing the most with this kind of hardened exterior, and you can see the layers and layers of what's gone on behind those eyes, and there's just no light in her whatsoever. It's all been sapped out. So you see that, of course, but there's nothing else.
Yeah, I thought the movie sucked. And I did think it was a total like, why does this exist? Like, if you're gonna make a
Mhm.
movie called Civil War set in the present in the United States and don't give you any context to what's going on, then what's the
Yeah.
point? Like, just make it a war set on Mars or a war set in, 1640 in like Iceland. Because the things they were trying to say, I think, after thinking about the movie a little bit more, though I did only see it yesterday, is that the journalist, like, if you're a photographer, how much are you culpable in what's going on? Like, if you see someone get killed, are you supposed to save them or are you supposed to not? And if you're really not, right, you're supposed to let it happen. Well, what does that do to you over
Yeah.
time if you're basically just numbing yourself to the horrors that you have to witness because you can't participate? Like, part of your job is just to document, not to participate.
Right.
Like, you could set that in any war, in any conflict, if you're going to make it this thing. And a lot of it was the marketing of making this into like, oh, this is going to be about the American civil, a new American Civil
Right.
War. Absolutely wasn't about that, I thought, at all,
No.
because you strip out all those details. Like, I do want to know why California and Texas were together. I mean, maybe I can disagree with that, but just give me something so I can hang my hat on like what actually is going on in this world. So for me, like, that's why I didn't care about the characters, because I didn't understand what was going on, like, on the larger level. So like the characters, I couldn't relate to them. Like, I'm not afraid for them. I'm not like, it just, none of
Yeah.
it matters because the movie purposely pulls all these punches to try to pretend like, I got it as arrogance from Alex Garland, who I'm not a huge fan of, especially the movies he's written and directed. But it's like, oh, I'm gonna be cool, like not take a side, and that's gonna make me so cool. I'm like, no, that just makes you lazy. And the movie can have a side. It doesn't mean the audience has to agree with it or not, but just have, or maybe the side's not the wrong thing in this. It's more like the context. Give some more information here. Like, I felt like I got more information from the trailer and the marketing
Mhm.
campaign in terms of what was actually going on in the wider world or the wider conflict than I did in the film itself. I just thought that was honestly honestly lazy and not like I wasn't into it because I couldn't relate to what was going on. And I think your point around the characters not having much to do, I agree. But at least if you're giving the world more interesting, like the world building being interesting, then I can kind of glom on to like the characters, or at least care about the situations that they're in. But this just didn't give that. And maybe that was the point. I'm thinking, well, are you trying to take that, holier than thou stance of like, oh, I'm not political? Like, well,
Right.
everyone's political and everything is
Yeah.
political. Like, you can't escape it.
Yeah.
Being non-political is the most political thing you can possibly do. But I just don't like, it's like, I think it's laziness, honestly. So yeah, I did think the movie was not good. I mean, technically, you're right. I think it was very well done in terms of the scope of the film. That the sound design was amazing. The Jesse Plemons scene was really well like
Mm-hmm.
done. Even though, again, I'm like, what's exactly going on here? Like, whose motivations is what? It's like I couldn't feel that afraid because I didn't know what was going on in the wider conflict. But it's I think Kirsten Dunst actually, I think did an admirable job. Like kind of what I was referencing earlier about I'm so used to her being having a lot of spunk and personality. The fact that now she's this weathered, beaten down, photojournalist that is so jaded, she doesn't care about anything anymore. Like that affected me at least. And then there's a little bit of a cliche kind of arc with her character that I've seen in a
Oh
bunch of
yeah.
movies. Where like now I care because there's a young person here, and
Yeah.
but I think she actually did probably the best job actually in the cast. Personally, I was most impressed with her in terms of what was she able to convey very subtly without a lot of dialogue or a lot of even like physical acting. You could just sort of see it in her eyes and her expression sometimes as she was slowly breaking down more and
Yeah.
more over the course of the film and just being like, why? How can I participate by not participating in this?
Yeah.
Right? Like they're
Yeah.
the bystander just having to take pictures, and that must weigh on you at the end
Of
of the day.
course. Yeah. And
Not
I wish
not being
they'd
able to do anything.
explored that more,
Yeah.
honestly,
Yeah, me
because there's
too.
so much richness there, right? Like you've been doing this. And yeah, like I said, I agree with I don't really care much about the context because I can sort of just live in the present of
Yeah, I
like, okay,
can't do
this is
that.
where we are at.
Right.
But I think I like the word lazy or even pretentious, I guess. Like do one of the two.
Mm-hmm.
Either do the context and then let the characters hang on that, like you're saying, or preferably for me, don't even do much exposition, but let the characters guide you, right? Like,
Yeah.
why are we not so much how we got here, but more like what are our motivations and why are we reacting the way we are reacting? And
Mm-hmm.
there are some scenes, but I just wanted way more of that. Like you see her in the bathtub scene, like sort of haunted by all the images that she's taken. I want
Mm-hmm.
to know more about that. Not
Yes.
saying do flashbacks or backstories, but just have her spend more time in our thoughts, and
Mm-hmm.
versus we go from set piece to set piece to set piece, which I don't know. So I liked it more than you did, it
Mm-hmm.
seems like, but I definitely wrestled with it. There's somewhere in this concept like a pretty incredible movie, but
Yes.
I
Yes.
don't think it delivers.
Yeah, and speaking of just like other movies, when I realized this movie wasn't really about the conflict or America trying to say any things like that, and it was about photojournalism. It reminded me both of like the Oliver Stone movie Salvador, if you've never seen it, about a photojournalist,
Mm,
true story, really good sort of explorations of similar themes. But actually, the first thing that came to mind after I left the theater was a YouTube clip I saw that was of a BBC documentary about nature photographers,
mm,
and they're filming this thing of these penguins down in Antarctica. And these penguins are trapped in this ravine and like they start freezing to death. And, like all their babies are dying. And the photographers are like, well, we can't really go in there. Like, have to be breaking the ethical code of like what we're supposed to be doing. And then it got so bad. The guys are like crying, like, we have to do something. So they like dug a tunnel and then let the penguins just naturally kind of escape. But they were wrestling with that line between do we get involved? What is the ethics of this? And I really thought that like 2 minute clip from this BBC documentary kind of was more of character development and moved me a lot more seeing this than what I think Alex Garland was trying to do, or at least the part of the movie that I latched onto the most about the photojournalism piece. I'm like, this just was better with the penguins than what he was trying to do here.
yeah, no, there isn't much there, sadly. And even like the super on the nose sort of shot of, again, spoiler warning, spoiler alert, the way Kirsten Dunst comes in and saves Kelly, and then she's being shot at as she's going down. It's just so on the nose.
Yeah.
I almost like I didn't laugh, but I sort of had like a bit of a, oh my gosh, they're
Yeah.
doing this.
Yeah, me too. Well,
Yeah.
that was our discussion on Civil War. Hopefully that was interesting for listeners. If you haven't seen it, maybe you won't want to see it after this or not. I don't know.
No,
It
I
is
would say see it because I
okay,
think it
okay.
is an interesting debate point. It does spark conversation, which I think is amazing, right? That's
Mhm.
what one of the goals of art is, that or should be. So I think it definitely does that. So I would say go watch it.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'll recommend it, but hopefully at least like this discussion. So now we're going to shift into more of an in-depth discussion on Kirsten Dunst and her career. So what we do in this section, just to remind new listeners that we have three categories we each go through. So the first is our first love. This is the movie that first this actor made an impact on us. Then we have the masterpiece. This is what we think is the best performance that this actor or actress has ever done. And then finally, wild card. This is anything you want to bring to the table that we think is interesting to comment on with this actor's career. So let's start off on First Love. So, Karan, what is your first love film for Kirsten Dunst?
Yeah, so my first love is Spider-Man from 2002. A quick logline: after being bitten by a genetically modified spider, a shy teenager gains spider-like abilities that he uses to fight justice as a masked superhero and face a vengeful enemy. Directed by Sam Raimi, starring Tobey Maguire, obviously, Willem Dafoe, and Kirsten Dunst. So yeah, this is my intro to her. I'd never seen anything of her, so I missed the entire sort of teenage
Hmm.
girl next door phase of her that you were talking about. So this was my first intro. I'd never heard of her before.
Did you
This is,
think, did you know she was not a real redhead? Now, I'm actually just genuinely curious now. Did that?
I thought she was a redhead for the
Oh,
longest
cool.
time.
Wow, it worked. Okay.
It worked. So yeah, I mean, this is like, what a launch or intro to really anybody. And growing up in India, and this movie was huge, absolutely took over. And I guess just thoughts on her first and then the movie. Just rewatching it, I just was so surprised by the fact that she actually isn't a lot in the movie, even though in
Yeah.
my mind, she sort of felt like, oh, she's like, she's the co-lead. She's in the movie. She's one of the inspirations or instigators of what ensues, because Tobey Maguire's character is in love with her, and
Hmm.
and then she's paired up with James Franco's character. So she's a very integral part of the story, but
Hmm.
also I think Jerry Maguire's coming of age, if you will. But she's not really there in the movie that much. So it was kind of kudos to her that she has such an amazing impact despite that. But I do remember watching the movie when I first watched it. I was okay on her, if I'm being very honest.
Hmm.
I wasn't, and this is also, Spider-Man, so like Toby and the special effects and just this, the scale of the movie sort of kind of overpowers and trumps everything. But I don't know, I sort of felt that, oh, she's always like unhappy, and of course bad things are happening. Her dad seems like an asshole, and she's not having much luck with really anything. She's dating bad guys and making poor choices, but also doesn't have the best sort of hand offered to her either. So it just felt kind of boring to me. I
Hmm.
remember when the first time I watched it, even though she looks amazing and has like great coats and things, even though she's poor apparently. And of course, like the kissing scene is like iconic, and
Hmm.
there are like bright spots, and you really see that when she smiles back at him, when Tobey Maguire is Peter Parker and doesn't have much self-confidence, it really means something, not just to him but also to the audience, because she has such a power of saying that, oh yeah, I've noticed you, or your eyes are of this color versus what I thought. Like it really lands because she just has so much kind of power to her. But rewatching it, I sort of, liked her performance even more than what I did before as a young teenager or however old I was.
Hmm.
That she, again, like we were talking earlier, she has that kind of spunk in her, and has so much brightness to her. At the same time, she can balance that with a lot of sadness and a lot of kind of depth, without kind of being like a scenery chewing kind of person. It's pretty subtle work, but it's all there essentially. And it's kind of amazing to see like how fully formed she is as an actress still at that young age, and she's doing all this in like a giant blockbuster movie, which is not something that people do now, especially in the MCU era, and now I guess the post MCU era. So pretty impressive overall. I just wish that they had more to do, or given her more to do in the movie, because
Hmm.
she's still, she's like the fourth person, I think. I feel like Aunt May and Uncle Ben, they have more to do than her, actually, even though they are probably in less of the movie.
I think they are saving more of the MJ Peter Parker stuff for the second movie, is more about their
True.
relationship. So she's in a little bit more, because you're right, like she's an instigator for him, and but she's more like a side character in
Yeah.
this movie, which I think she has enough energy and presence that it works. And also, the MJ role is a role where she is supposed to be like a girl next door, but have a lot of personality, a lot of
Mm.
spunk, and she definitely, I think, pulls that off really well here. I
Mhm.
I remember being shocked. I saw this at the time too. As a big comic book fan as a kid, and still am. So still am a comic book fan. Spider-Man wasn't always my favorite. We talked about Batman being my favorite superhero in a previous episode, but I always liked Spider-Man, and I think she did a great job capturing what MJ is supposed to be in terms of
Mm.
that personality and having that the confidence, but there's also like a vulnerability sort
And a
of wrapped in that
hesitation.
hesitation,
Yeah.
because she does come from a poorer family too. She is failing at trying to be an actress in this film. I just remember too, like being so surprised that she was in this role, because she was known as such a blonde, and MJ is
Mm.
obviously a redhead, and that was like
Mm.
really jarring to me when they cast
Oh,
this. But
wow.
I do think she again did a great job in this. I think this movie's strengths are really in the characters, and the relationships between especially the three friends is sort of the spine of the entire Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. That is what makes Spider-Man so interesting and great, is because he's relatable as a character, and you love him as a guy, Peter Parker as a person. And yes, there's cool superhero antics around it, but it really is about the character. I think that she brings a lot to that. I think Toby
Yep.
brings a lot to that. And Sam Raimi, to his credit too, was really the perfect director, I think, to pull this off. A lot of his humorous sensibilities, his crazy camera moves, and great editing, and really comic book kind of style. Like when Tobey
Hmm.
Maguire's making his suit, there's all these like superimposed of the different sketches he's doing, like all the stuff that Sam Raimi's been doing in all of his movies leading up to this. It still works in this context of this giant, big budget. It was the number one movie of the year in 2002. Like it was really a phenomenon that really
Yeah.
blew the doors off everything. So I think, she was a big part of that. And I think this is cool. This is like your first introduction to Kirsten Dunst. Again, not
I
knowing she was a
know.
blonde is really funny. That's crazy. Because for me, like she's always been just like this blonde
Mm.
star. So I guess
Mhm.
kudos to the wig or hair dye people that you thought she was a natural redhead. That's
No,
awesome.
I totally bought it. But yeah, as the movie, just like rewatching it, I hadn't seen it in many years. I was just blown away by like how good this movie is.
It's
I'm
so fun.
not typically a superhero movie person, but I think this is a movie. It just works on all levels, and I think you hit the nail on the head that it works because it's about the relationship and the characters are so deep, and also I think the coming of age part of it, which could literally be in any movie, is handled so beautifully. Also the introduction to the world building and the exposition of how this works and how does he become that, like that's all captured through a coming of age lens, which is just
Hmm.
so genius and so fun. Like I never get tired of it, versus in any other movie I'm like, if you start with Bruce Wayne's parents getting shot,
Oh
I will
yeah.
leave the theater.
Right, right,
Or if
right.
you do any other origin stuff, I will I will not be happy. But this, I'm happy to watch that whole kind of how he comes into this over and over again. And
Hmm.
that's because of Sam Raimi, how they wrote it. And I think the casting is just perfect. Like in my mind, Tobey Maguire is the best Spider-Man, will
Yeah.
always be.
Hmm.
And that's sort of perfect. And then the comic book quality of it, and even though CGI and such was not that advanced in that time, but the movie looks great. And
Hmm.
apart from I guess Green Goblin, like that feels not so great now. That said, Willem Dafoe definitely brings it. I mean, there's a lot of ham acting
He's
happening,
so good. Yeah.
but he's so good. Like
He's-
I think you need that. And that
yeah.
also is kind of genius that on one hand, you have really like grounded performances from Kristen Dunst and Joey Maguire, but then you definitely have like sort of more louder performances, Green Goblin, James Franco, even Aunt May and Uncle Ben,
Hmm.
they're sort of hamming it up as well. I think it feels intentional to me.
Oh,
Like,
100%.
you
Yeah.
need that for this to kind of literally pop out of the pages of a comic book, but then also have something meaningful and real. And that's why there is that emotional connection. Otherwise, you wouldn't care. I
Right.
certainly wouldn't care. So it's like a perfect movie, a perfect superhero movie. It just made me think that we didn't know how good we had it, or I guess we knew, but now even more so.
It is a classic. I mean, I think the best comparison to me just in the superhero genre would be like the Superman, the Richard Donner Superman movie.
Yeah,
This is like the an updated version of that. Like when I was
yeah,
in college seeing Spider-Man, I was like, oh, this must have been what it would like to see the Christopher Reeve Superman movie back in
yeah.
the 70s. Like that type of capturing the character perfectly and the energy and the fact that it was such a big phenomenon. Just a great film. Really, that whole trilogy. I'll even stand up for Spider-Man 3. Maybe we've already covered Spider-Man 2 actually in an earlier episode about
Yeah.
New York. Maybe one day we'll reach the point where we'll cover Spider-Man 3. I think has a lot
Yeah,
to offer and it's still unfairly maligned in my opinion.
I agree. I signed up for that movie too, actually, because it does tie a lot of loose ends and
Hmm.
such. So I remember liking it when it came out, even. All right. So, what is your first love of Kirsten Dunst?
So my first love is Drop Dead Gorgeous from 1999. This movie is directed by Michael Patrick Jan, starring Kirsten Dunst, Denise Richards, and Ellen Barkin. The plot summary: a small town beauty pageant turns deadly as it becomes clear that someone will go to any lengths to win. So, this movie, while I'd seen Kirsten Dunst in other films, just didn't really stand out much. She was a child actor, but this is the movie when I rented this on VHS video store after this had come out because it looked funny and I really
Mm,
like mockumentaries and just being blown away by this as a kid. Like this is so I found this so funny as a high school student. Again, I love the mockumentary style, though this is different than the Christopher Guest films where this was not improvised. This is a script that they're working off of. These are not improv actors, but they still do an incredible job of setting up this world of the beauty pageant and all the different contestants. And I also love how the filmmakers are like woven into the movie a little bit. Like sometimes you see the crew, the
hmm.
cameraman, the boom guy. So they really are leaning heavily into the documentary style, which I like a lot. And I think Kirsten Dunst just stands out as this contestant who is very, yeah, she's attractive. She's in a beauty pageant and she's like this teen blonde girl, but she's relatable in the sense that she has a very poor mother. She like, at school, she does the dishes in the school cafeteria because that's her job. And she has this genuine desire to win. Like these other characters that are, you follow in this pageant, they have all various, oh, I want to win because my mom won, or oh, I want to win because I want to do this thing afterwards. But Kirsten Dunst, you can tell, is just very genuine about it. So she's almost like homely sort of, but not in like an unattractive way, I guess. And it's just I think her performance stood out to me so much. Like, oh, this actress is so funny. Like, I hope she does more stuff. Like, I distinctly remember her standing out in this when I first saw it, and actually hadn't seen it in a number of years. And going back and rewatching it was really fun. I still felt it very funny and it's just incredibly dark though. Like they kill off like three or four of the contestants. Like these are teen girls, like over the course of the movie. And I like that though, that the movie does not try to be too cutesy. It's like a very dark humor, which I also like, especially liked it a lot as a teenager. So I think it's still an underrated sort of gem that's forgotten about a lot. What were your thoughts of Drop Dead Gorgeous? Had you seen this before?
I had not seen it before, so watched it the first time. Always wanted to see it. I think I'd heard you talk about it just, in real life. So it was great to see it. I agree. Like this movie was amazing. I was blown away by how clever and sharp the movie is. The world building is great. Every single performer in the movie is great. It feels lived in, and obviously it's funny, but it's like you said, it's very dark. It's actually quite sad too throughout.
Very
And
sad.
sort of has something real to say, but it doesn't make fun of the girls. I think
Hmm.
that to me is very critical, and that's why you're invested. Otherwise, this would be all at arm's length. It's not making fun of the pageantry, it's not making fun of the girls. I mean, they're doing the best they can, right? They're
Hmm.
trying to make something more of their lives through whatever intention, their parents or their own or what have you. And I think that's important. There's an earnestness to everybody, actually. Oh, we're going to do this. Even the Denise Richards of the world in the movie, even they have an earnestness to them. But the absolute standout is Kirsten Dunst. Like for me, it's like as somebody who's seen her primarily as an adult actor
Oh
and
yeah.
maybe a more of a melancholic, pun intended, actress, to see her in this avatar of kind of bright and earnest and but yet intelligent and grounded and not sappy at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
All of those shades, it was like a knockout. I mean, she carries the entire movie on her shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
There are not many people I've seen do that in their entire careers, let alone a teenager. So I was just blown away. And this is kind of what I was referring to in the beginning of the podcast is like, it's really fascinating to see how a career went because this is such an all-rounded great persona that I didn't even know she had that in her.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so amazing. She like jumps off the screen. So I don't know. This movie is going to be in my regular rotation, I think, because she was just so good and the movie is just so fun and but has a lot on his mind. I
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think the key thing, which also Christopher Guest, who, directed Best in Show, Waiting for Guffman,
Yeah.
the similar types of movies, he's not mocking, and so this movie isn't either, like the people or the concept of like beauty pageants. Because you have to be invested in this because the character is invested in this, and that's where the comedy comes from, and that's
Right.
where it works. And I think this movie does a lot of things that Best in Show, another movie we actually covered on our podcast that Christopher Guest made about dog show competitions a year after this. A lot of it is very similar, and it's interesting going
Mm-hmm.
back and watching this and be like, oh yeah, actually a lot of the things I don't want to say Christopher Guest stole it from, but this film did before Best in Show did it in just a little bit of a different way. But
Yeah,
it's just
this is
interesting seeing
darker
these
and sadder,
a
I
lot
think.
darker. Yeah. A lot
Much
darker.
sadder. It's like bone dry.
Yeah.
Like there were moments where I was like, oh yeah, is this being played for laughs? Because I feel really sad for all these people. I want to
Hmm.
help them.
Yeah.
But there is comedy in that too, though.
That's true. Okay, so those were our first loves. So next category is masterpiece. So Karan, what is your masterpiece for Kirsten Dunst?
All right, so my masterpiece is Marie Antoinette from 2006, a movie that we actually covered in our soundtrack episode on the podcast, directed by Sofia Coppola, starring Kirsten Dunst, Jason Schwartzman, Rip Torn. It's a quick logline, the retelling of France's iconic but ill-fated Queen Marie Antoinette from her betrothal and marriage to Louis the whatever number this is at 14 to her reign as queen at 19 and to the end of her reign as queen and ultimately the fall of Versailles. So I think to me this performance sort of falls in the middle of what I've been hinting at, that there is a lonely and melancholic quality to this character, and Christian is sort of amazing at that in this movie, trapped in these beautiful palaces and beautiful dresses, even having a lot of fun. You can always see from the very beginning that she's in a place where she didn't want to be, or
Hmm.
she's in a place where she's expected to produce an heir and has these rituals around her, and she's unhappy and lonely throughout most of the movie. But at the same time, she has that kind of spunk and kind of that brightness to her. And you see that kind of change over the movie. In the beginning, it's more innocent. And then as she comes to power, maybe that spunk and brightness becomes more excessive, where it's all about materialistic goods and what have you, because she's trying to find meaning in all of those things. So it feels like a very calibrated kind of in her wheelhouse performance, kind of bridging the early part of her career and the later part of her career, which is why to me this is her masterpiece, because you see all of those shades. And then I think her partnership and relationship with Sofia Coppola is legendary, all the way from Virgin Suicides to what have you. Like to me, those two are sort of synonymous. And Sophia obviously has great relationships with her lead actresses, and I think Christian is kind of up there. So I had to put something of Sofia Coppola when in talking about Kirsten Dunst. I think this movie kind of got me from the very beginning when I saw it, and I talked more about this on the podcast of like how contemporary it feels, not just from the score, but really in the portrayal of the queen. Like she sort of feels like a teenage girl who's in this extraordinary circumstance trying to find her way, and it's hard, it's tricky. She has friends, no friends. The guy is weird that she's with. It's this feels so contemporary and modern. It's because of Sophia, but it's also because of Kristen. I think she brings that, but it doesn't feel odd. Like, oh, we are not doing some, I don't know, period piece with, modern actors, and we are talking in a modern way and it feels all pretentious and doesn't add up. Like, it does add up. Like, you do feel transported but you also can relate to it, which I think is what she brings to the movie.
Yeah, I think that's what Dunst and Sophia too. I mean, I want to give the director credit on this bringing Dunst in, but then what Kirsten does in this of making this character who is a figure from history who's not necessarily sympathetic. Like it's not like we look back and oh no, like Marie Antoinette got her head cut off. It's like, well, that had to happen. It's fine. Where but Dunst kind of brings this relatability to the performance,
Humanity.
humanity, right? Where you do feel for her of being trapped in this role. I mean, we talked a lot more about that in our previous episode, and my thoughts on that. This movie are still not great. Like I kind of want to like it. I liked it better this time than the last time, but I still don't. It doesn't really work for me. But in terms of with Dunst, what I think is so interesting in this one is it really is a turning point. I feel like between her growing up as well. She was
That's
in these
true.
teen movies, and we'll get to another one in a second, where that was her persona. And in the movie, she starts out as that, but then by the end of the movie, she's really grown up, even more so than her husband, Jason
Yeah.
Schwartzman's character, who there's one scene where they know they're basically like the palace is gonna get stormed and it's kind of all over. And he's there just at this dinner table looking like he's still a small boy, being like, oh, I don't know what to do. And she's
Yeah.
like, she like puts her hand on his hand and comforts him in a way you're like, oh, she's now the adult and like
Yeah.
she's grown up. She's comforting him and he's supposed to be the king and this guy. And like he's been sort of just the child throughout the entire movie. And
Right.
that turn in her, I think, was necessary in this point in her career too, of finding how she can escape or move to the next stage of not playing
Hmm.
the teen, the MJs or the teen
Hmm.
blondes in these comedies. How can she get out of that? Like Sophia helped her do that, and I think this performance of a person who was forced to grow up, Marie Antoinette, I mean, foisted into this world is similar to I think what Dunst was trying to do. She was trying to grow her career and take on these more adult roles, and I think her performance in this is what is the movie to me.
Yeah.
Makes
It
it
really is.
work as much as it does for me work. It's really her performance, I think, that works. A
Yeah.
lot of the other choices that don't really land on me, but Dunst's portrayal of me being sympathetic and empathetic towards the situation that Marie Antoinette was in, that's something that I never would have gotten throughout
Right.
the
It's a hard
my
thing to
life
pull
except for that.
off.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Even though I love cake, but still.
Yeah, still, I mean, it's not like I'm sad that she got, taken away at the end, but you do
No,
feel for that a little bit more, like her
definitely.
position of being like wasn't she didn't want this.
No.
She's just in this role and she's a victim of history and
Yeah.
circumstance.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with like this is a transition point for her. And in a weird way, like now that I think about it, like this is the beginning of sort of the sad girl persona, and there's
Hmm.
still lightness and fun in this. But after this, it sort of definitely stays more in line with sort of the more somber, sadder kind of character. Because I think she is probably drawn to it, obviously very good at it.
Hmm.
And then that's you start to see more and more of that and less of the bright, spunky person. And some of that is also growing up. But it's not always true. Sometimes even people who grow up, they still sort of carry that. And she always has that, to your point. Like you can see it behind the eyes, but the roles that she's chosen have, I feel like, been more of this nature.
Hmm.
So I don't know, maybe it was this movie or Sophia kind of that helped her take this road.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely could be.
All right. So that was my masterpiece for Kirsten Dunst, Marie Antoinette. What is your masterpiece?
So my masterpiece, a little bit different vibe, is
Eh,
Bring It On from 2000.
yes.
So this movie's directed by Peyton Reed, starring Kirsten Dunst, Eliza Dushku, and Jesse Bradford and Gabrielle Union. The IMDb plot summary: a champion high school cheerleading squad discovers its previous captain stole all their best routines from an inner city school, must scramble to compete at this year's championships. So this movie, I love this movie. I saw this not in theaters actually. It was on VHS, like rented it when I was in college, and immediately was like, this movie is incredibly funny, a lot of great energy, and a lot of it is due to Kirsten Dunst's performance in this. I think is the best use of this bubbly, fun kind of like ball of energy, but not like a dumb blonde way. Like there is more to this. She feels more well-rounded in her portrayal. She feels like a real teenage girl who is in these situations. Like just in the way that there's a scene early on in the movie where guy she's kind of crushing on has a shirt of the Clash, like the famous punk band. She's like, "Oh, is that your band?" something that an
Mhm.
airhead blonde would say. And he's like, no, this is a famous band from like the 70s, punk band. And her response, like, oh, that's cool. That's vintage. And there's something about that response. It's like, oh, so she's not dumb. It's just like she doesn't know about this thing. And like she's still trying to relate to the guy. Like little things like that is adds layers onto this character that easily could be like a Cher from Clueless or, even like an Elle Woods from Legally Blonde. Like play up that sort of that side
Mhm.
of it. She feels like a fully well-rounded character in this film. And the comedic chops she has too are just so good. Like her comedic timing, playing off of the other actors is just great. And this movie I think is a classic, and a lot of it is her. I mean, though I will admit, like I'm predisposed. Like I love movies. I've said this on the podcast before, where people like put on a show and have to. There's a big
Mhm.
cheerleading competition at the end, like that I like. And any movie with like teams and together trying to accomplish something, I think is great too. But there's a lot of other things in this movie that I think make this stand out too, and that are really special that I get into in a bit. But I just want to know, yeah, what are your thoughts on Bring It On?
Yeah, again, I've never seen it. I always wanted to
Oh,
see it
cool.
and finally watched it. And I'm with you. I absolutely loved it. It was the feeling in my mind immediately after watching the movie was, oh, this came before Pitch Perfect.
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah. No, it's like the
this is the
same
OG.
movie. Yeah, it's like the same beats. Well, there are some actually pretty big
Yeah,
differences
yeah,
between in terms of what the themes are, but
yeah.
it's basically the exact
The
same.
feeling is very similar,
Exactly.
but like super fun, great world building once again. But I think, yeah, like I said about your first choice as well, your first love, she like holds the entire movie and carries it. Because
Hmm.
unlike Drop Dead Gorgeous, where it's a satire and the tone is very much sort of tight, in this case, I think the movie is very funny and fun, but also gets a little slapstick and silly
Yeah.
at times and is sort of, overblown and can be, dismissed as sort of like a fun, funny teen comedy.
Hmm.
But at the center of it is Kirsten Dunst, who I feel like I said, carries the movie, but it's like a fully fledged character, all the layers. It's a real person. And I think that's what elevates the movie. Like you remove her, this movie is, a B tier movie in my mind.
Yeah. The
As
energy.
fun as it is,
Hmm.
but I think it's her presence that makes this movie feel real. The stakes are real. You care. You want them to win because, yeah, she's cutesy and fun, real, relatable, but also intelligent and wants
Hmm.
it.
Right.
And you can see the struggle of how she's trying to kind of get this group together and band them together, but things always don't work out. And you see her struggle through that. So, love this movie. And she was just great.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, like when they realize that their routines were stolen over the years,
Yeah.
her decision to try to mend that and not just keep doing that, and the solidarity that they have with the inner city team, Gabrielle Union's team, I think is
Oh,
also great. That easily could have
love
been
that.
some like sort of maybe problematic portrayals
Yeah, or
and
too on the
too
nose
on the
and
nose.
preachy,
Exactly.
it feels very real.
Right, but it's a lot of these themes are about like cultural appropriation, artistic appropriation, but solidarity amongst these cheerleaders that are just want the best of one another. Each of those teams are like, who would let the best team win? There is that, greater good of competition that both is driving both of them. That I
Yeah,
think is just also elevates this movie a little bit.
yeah.
And then two, I think that if I were a studio head or could make a law, every movie that was made, even Civil War that we just saw, would end with either a blooper reel, a dance off, or have a curtain call where like they show the faces and the names. And this movie ending with like a blooper reel and like just people, all the cats dancing at the end, incredible. Any movie
So
that does
fun.
that is immediately gets like 5 more points for me. And I think this is one of my favorites, actually. The whole dance sequence at the end. Like I went back and watched it 3 times, just the ending after I saw this movie, and actually watched it twice in 24 hours. So like when I watched it once, I was like, I can't not watch this immediately again. It's so good. And I put it immediately on again. I just love this movie so much. And I think a
Uh,
lot of it just captures the perfect essence of what in my mind was Kirsten Dunst was this, even though,
yeah,
yes, she did move on from that as
yeah,
she got older. I guess you kind of have to. But maybe she'll come back and do Bring It On. I know there's been several other ones, but a true sequel where maybe she's the mother or the coach or something and
right.
trying to tap into this persona again. But she's great. And
Yeah,
also Eliza Dushku, I think, does an incredible job too.
yeah.
Just want to call her out. I think their chemistry is great together. It's just a super fun movie. Love it.
Super fun. So great. A huge blind spot got checked on my list. So that's
Nice. Okay, so now that we've done masterpieces, our final category is wild card. So this is just any film that we want to bring to the table that's interesting in some way for this actress. So, Karan, what is your wild card for Kirsten Dunst?
Yeah, so my wild card is Melancholia from 2011, directed by Lars von Trier, starring Kirsten Dunst, Charlotte Gainsbourg, Kiefer Sutherland, Alexander Skarsgård. Quick logline: two sisters find their already strained relationship challenged as a mysterious new planet threatens to collide with Earth. So this is a pretty heavy, dark movie. And I think I chose it as my wild card is because I think this is the movie that fully galvanizes kind of the somber, serious, kind of sad persona that I now associate with Kristen Dunst. So, like we talked about Marie Antoinette kind of being the beginning of that, perhaps, like this is sort of elevating that and further grounding that even more so. So, everything after that, at least up till now, Power of the Dog, what have you, has been kind of in the same mold. But there is something. I mean, it's a disturbing movie, obviously. It has so many layers of kind of, what's happening to our planet. It's about relationships between sisters and fathers and daughters and love. It has a lot on its mind. It's slow pacing and can be quite frustrating and grating, but I think it does have this kind of really haunting effect, and I think she kind of embodies that. And otherwise I think this movie would be very difficult to watch. But I think we are coming back on the same theme, is that even though she's playing a serious character, the lightness and the brightness that she always carries is still there. And that's why you care. That's why you invested. Otherwise, you wouldn't care. And so yeah, that's to me the power of this movie. But it's a hard one. I don't know if you'd seen it before.
I had not seen it before, and it definitely was. It's a tough watch movie, and it's about depression is the
Yeah.
point of the film, and
Yeah.
it definitely was. As someone who associates, and still to this day, Kirsten more with like the Bring It Ons, it was very shocking to see this, even knowing that the movie was going to be very somber, of
Mm.
just having her be so yeah depressed, devoid of emotion and all these things that I expect to see and energy that I expect to see in Dunst. But obviously, the point of the movie, it's about people that are depressed, so they don't have those things. So that actually made it the casting at least work for me because it affected me more seeing an actress that I don't associate with being the sad girl in things. Being the sad girl made me like, wow, like this is, I feel really bad for her then because I know what she could be if she was free of this depression. But yeah, I did find the movie not very engaging. It's a little too arty for me. I'm not a big Lars von Trier fan, and it's just also sad. Just that I kind of took the message of the message of the movie is depression is something you need to just embrace and be calm in the face of this because there's nothing you
Yeah.
can do, which is
Yeah.
sad. Like her sister, when the world's ending, her sister's like panicking and trying to do all these things and fight against it. And Kirsten Dunst is sort of like, well, it's gonna end. Let's just kind of embrace it and go with it. And that's sad. It's just like a
Yeah.
sad message, It's
Yeah.
but I've never dealt with depression on that level that she's dealing with this movie, so I'm sure those that resonates with people that have been that seriously affected their mental health in that way. But it's sad sort of message of the movie that there doesn't seem like there's anything you can do in those situations.
Sadly, yeah. And
Yeah.
that probably is true at times. But yeah, you're right. Like I can't even imagine, like for me, I joined Kristen's career sort of later. So this
Hmm.
feels like the gradual sort of next step. So to watch this, if you've known her as the Bring It On girl, like,
Yeah.
I can only imagine how jarring. And the fact that she still landed and made sense, like that's, I guess, testament to her performance.
Exactly. No, I think it is. She works well in that movie in that way, and I think she can still operate on that level. It's not like I felt she wasn't authentic.
No.
It wasn't that it was at all. It was jarring, and maybe that's what they were going for in the casting choice, or she wanted to evoke that in the viewers too.
Now I feel
But
like she's been building up to
to
this
that,
movie, and then it sort of, transitions completely. But it's been happening since Marie Antoinette, I feel
hmm
like. Yeah.
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
All right, Alex. So what is your wild card for Kirsten Dunst?
So for my wild card, we're going a little further back in her filmography. So this is Interview with the Vampire from 1994, directed by Neil Jordan, starring Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise, Antonio Banderas, and Kirsten Dunst. IMDb plot summary: a vampire tells his epic life story: love, betrayal, loneliness, and hunger. Okay. Sounds more
Okay.
like a tagline than a log line, but hey, that's cool. So I put this one on the list because so this is one of Kirsten Dunst's early roles, and she plays a character in this film who's a child who gets turned into a vampire. So she's essentially stuck as a child for her entire vampire life. And this is a movie I saw late in high school. I was a huge fan of the book. I read this book and just like, this is one of my favorite books. And this character of Claudia was my favorite character because it was really interesting having this child basically turn into a vampire. She didn't want it. She just got turned because she would have died. And then the vampire, Brad Pitt plays, feels bad for her, and she gets turned into this vampire. And how she wrestles with basically being forever seen as a child. You know, she can't even cut her hair. Everyone's always going to look at her and think she's a child, even though she could live for decades and hundreds of years now as a vampire. She's such a fascinating character. And I think
Mhm.
Kirsten Dunst, so early in her career, being able to pull off this performance where she doesn't act like a child actor.
No.
She comes across as an adult in a child's body, which is a very hard thing to pull off. And I think she just is really a standout in this film, which again, I did not see when it first came out. But after watching it, she still was the part of the movie that stuck with me the most because, again, she's my favorite character from the books. And even now, like actually watching this, I haven't seen this movie in maybe like 10 years. Watching it for this podcast again, she stands out in a way even more because I felt that the movie is incredibly dated in a lot of different ways, especially in the performances that Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt both give. I
Mhm.
think are very much like early 90s in a, it's a period drama, over the
Right.
top thing. I mean, they're both interesting kind of in what they're doing, especially Tom's you having a lot of fun in this role as a vampire, but it's very much early 90s, where I think Dunn's performance just seems like a really great performance that doesn't feel as dated, at least to me. So what are your thoughts on an interview with the vampire? Had you been interviewed before?
No, so I was a three for three. I had not
Oh
seen any
wow.
of your movies this
Oh,
time
cool. Very
for
very
some
nice.
reason. So it was a deep dive in Kirsten's filmography for
Nice.
real.
Nice.
Um, Now I agree with you. I think she is such a standout, and like you said, like playing that adult character when you are a child and not make that pretentious or like a know-it-all kind of child, which can be very annoying and
Hmm.
like a film child. This
Yes,
can easily
yes.
be that. Like this is not that. It feels like a true character, which obviously credit to her, but also to the director, because I think it's very hard to get that out of a child performer. The other thing that struck out to me with her, which I don't really think of when I think of Kirsten Dunst, is a lot of rage. Like there's
Yes.
several scenes
Yeah.
where she's like screaming at, the two adult vampires or what have you, like really asking for her own through this frustration that she has, which was really fascinating to watch because I never think of her. I think of her as a much more mellower internal character,
Mm.
and an internal actress as well. So it was kind of fun to see that oh, this is how she started. And then
Hmm.
you see that transform into kind of brightness and spunk, the two words we've been using throughout, and then it becomes mellower and mellower and sadder and sadder. So sort of an interesting
Yeah.
graph to go all the way back. Oh, this is where it started. But I
Hmm.
agree, the movie feels dated. I had seen clips of this movie. I mean, both Tom and Brad at the peak of their powers, and they'll in terms
Yes.
of at least how they look. So I was expecting like fireworks in terms of like chemistry and even sexual chemistry and what have you, but there isn't much of that, to be honest. And the movie sort of feels sort of dull in
Hmm.
many ways. So I'm glad I watched it for her, but overall as a movie, I agree. Like it doesn't really age super well, even though I love the costumes and the world building, the production design, like all of that is amazing, I think, in the
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. I think that though overshadows a lot of the messages in the book and sort of like the point
uh
of the movie in terms of how this character who gets Brad's character, Pitt's character gets turned into a vampire. It's like, what does that mean? Who am I now? How do I fit in? What is the point of my life? How do I relate to the world as it's changing around me? And because they're sort of dialing up the melodrama and, in the early 90s, I think there was this period of time where they were taking these Merchant Ivory type sort of productions and
mhm.
trying to bring them into genre pictures and like over like dial up to 11 what Merchant Ivory were doing, which is a lot more about subtle kind of
Yep.
performances and and this was a period where it was not that from the, the American Hollywood taking that style. And this was definitely in that, oh, we can make like a vampire movie like Immersion Ivyfield, but dial it up to 11 and make the costumes too over the top and the drama over the top and the hair over the top. And it just is very, again, dated, I think is the best way to describe it. So it doesn't, and it buries, I think, why I, again, love this book. It's just such a fantastic
Mm.
book because of how it's, the dealing with what the vampire is wrestling with, what immortality means, and all the things that he's seen. And there's a lot of allegories, about, adoption and, same-sex couples and all these sort of things are wrapped in here.
Mhm.
It's really hard to kind of get at that in the way that this movie's done. So I don't think it does the book a very good service, though. It's fun to see Tom have such a good time. Like
Yeah,
he definitely carries the movie energy wise, and when he kind of disappears for a while, it
it
just the
becomes
movie
even
really
better.
grinds to a halt. Like Brad
Yeah,
Pitt seems lost in this thing, to be honest.
yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Now, having gone really early on in her career, why don't we go to what we like to do at the end of these episodes, which is talk about, okay, what should she do in the future?
I probably should have led with this, but I think I want her to do a comedy. I want her to go back to her roots of brightness and more explosion, maybe even rage, and maybe work with someone like Adam McKay, or
Hmm.
somebody who's a comedy director but draws really rich characters that can be farcical or kind of are in on the joke. I think that would be amazing. I would love to see her in that light.
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. When we were talking about Bring It On, I had that idea of like, well, she should just do an actual direct sequel and have her play the same character just now as an older woman. I would love to see that. I think that would be nice to see her kind of go back to that. And what she could do now at her age and how she would play characters like that, I think would be really fun. Plus, I just love to be back in that Bring It On world. Bring
Yeah.
it on. Keep bringing it on. I mean, not the there was like seven or
Not the
eight
trashy
sequels,
sequels.
but
No,
those are not in the same. They're everyone is
no.
its own universe. So I want like an actual direct sequel to Bring It On. So that's what I'd love to see her do.
You could do a mashup of Drop Dead Gorgeous and Bring It On, where she's now older and a mom, like
Oh,
playing a version of Kirstie Alley's character, and who knows,
oh
something
yeah.
darker is happening, and so that could be interesting.
That would be fun. Yeah, it's comedy. I think we both feel that that's what she should be jumping back into. And speaking of comedy, yeah, comedy. Why don't you tease our next episode? We have a interesting choice for our next one coming up in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so for our next episode, we've picked somebody very controversial. It's Woody Allen, has a new movie out called Coup de Chance, which means stroke of luck, and it's also the 35th year anniversary of Manhattan. And I think it'll be an interesting episode to talk about Woody and talk about his movies, but also talk about art versus artist, which is very much at the center of his filmography. So yeah, that's the next episode.
Will be definitely interesting. Just looking at the films we each chose, it's like polar opposites. So it'll be fun to kind of discuss that too. So we hope you enjoyed our discussion today of Kirsten Dunst and Civil War. Be sure to let us know in the comments your thoughts on Civil War and Kirsten Dunst and maybe some other films of hers that you like. So we're available here on YouTube as well as on all podcast platforms. So don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and please rate and review us as well. So it really helps new listeners find the show. And with that, I will say goodbye, Karan.
Let them eat cake.